Today we are going to start with a special kind of join. It's called blending in Tableau, and I'm going to illustrate that with these three files. Okay, and this file was already there from last week, but I added these two files. So please go ahead and download these two files. Okay. Okay, I'm going to first describe what blending is, and then we'll talk about when to use blending and when to use join. Because these two are kind of similar in the sense that both join and blending join two different data tables, but the way they do it is fundamentally different, and they are used for different purposes. Okay. So first thing is to illustrate how the blending is done. Okay, so I'm going to use the same two data sources that we started our discussion on join with. Okay, these are the two very small files, and then we looked at larger files and what happens when we join, right? Same two files, but now we're going to do what is called blending, right? And here again, so you have a primary data source and then the secondary data source, and we'll call primary data source, well, it's not really left and right, so you can, of the two, so this is your first data set, this is your second data set. Okay, and we will use the first data set as primary and the second data set as the secondary data set. Okay, and once again, like in join, for us to blend, there must be a common field. Okay, if there is nothing common between the two tables, then there is no way of blending them. Okay, so there must be a way of connecting one record to another, and which in this case is user ID. So the key is user ID is equal to patron ID. So that's the key. So we're going to look at this column and match it against that column. And then we are going to do the blending. So in blending, what happens is the secondary data source is first aggregated. Okay, so that means if there is a repetition of the key, then they are combined. Okay, and then the linking will take place. And this is extremely important in certain situations. Okay. So what will happen is that sheet 1, okay, so it's going to be like that, right? Then the sheet 2 will be aggregated, so which means pattern 1, there are two instances of that in the second sheet, say they both will be combined. So the amount here will become 400, right? So the 300 and 100 will get combined. Okay, and of course this ID is 1 and 1, so that's gone. So now the branch has, it's not a numeric field. If it is a numeric field, you can just add them up like the amount. But since this is not a numeric field and there are two different values, you cannot resolve that when you combine the two. So, you end up with simply a star. So, the first thing is this is aggregated now, okay, and there is more to be said about this aggregation. We will talk about that a little later. Okay. So, right now, so it has been aggregated in this fashion. Okay. So, now the blending works similar to join. So, you start with user ID 1, okay, type is G, pattern ID is 1. Now, branch does not get a value. So, it is a star and then 400, right. So, 1 and W now, okay, pattern ID 1 star 400. Okay. And then you get 2. So, 2 J, pattern ID is 2 from the second source. Okay. Now, branch is B1 because it is there is no ambiguity here, there is just one value. So, there is no star. So, B1 and 200 and then 4 M, all right, 4 M. Okay, there is no, so this acts like the left join. Okay. Now, there is no corresponding field in the secondary data source, right, but since it acts like a left join, there will be a record for 4 M, but there is no linking record in sheet 2. So, this will be null. Okay. So, this is how blending will happen. So, we will look at how to use it and how to understand blending in a larger example. Right now, we are just going through the mechanics of how it is done. Okay. So, let us look at an example here. We start out with so sheet 1 that has the first data source, right. Now, if you are going to do a join, you will just drag the sheet 2 into the screen and you will have your join. But for blending, okay, you have to do it in a different way. Okay. So, when blending is what you need, what you have to do is to go to a sheet, okay, not the data source screen. So, go to your sheet and then do data and new data source. Okay. Because if you add a data from the data screen, then join is what will happen. So, the data sources will use the join technique to join. If you want to blend, then you have to do it from a sheet. Okay. All right. So, now Excel file, it is the same file, but this time it is going to be sheet 2. Okay, so bring sheet 2. So when you do the new data from the sheet, once you connect to the file, then you're brought back to data source, and then you will see a separate screen, okay, and you can bring in the second data source into view. All right. So now if you go back to the sheet, you will see the two data sources separated. Okay, they are not joined. So you'll have the first data source, and then you have the second data source. Okay. So now we have to blend the two. And so we're going to do this blending several times. So you will get the hang of it. So here which one is the primary data source and which one is the secondary data source is determined by what data source you use first in the visualization. So we will do both. So like for example here, if you go to sheet 1 and if you bring in user ID in here, right? So sheet 1 is now the primary data source. So the one on the left, and that is indicated by a blue check mark by the side of the disk icon. So that blue check tells you that this is the primary one. Okay. So now you switch to the second sheet. Okay. Now if the name of the linking field is the same, like user ID and user ID here, Tableau will automatically do the linking. Okay. But that's not the case here. So we have user ID in the first one and pattern ID in the second one. So we have to do this manually. So go to data and edit relationships. Yeah. So edit relationship will let you add new relationships or edit existing ones. Okay, they both are done with this link, with this command. Okay. Edit relationship. So here it's already suggesting something. Sheet 1 is your primary data source, and sheet 2 is the secondary data source, which is what we started out with, right? So right now it's set to automatic, and you see nothing because automatic didn't work. Okay, there is user ID in one and pattern ID in the other, so automatic didn't work. Okay, if there was user ID and user ID in both places, automatic would have linked the two, and you would see that here. Okay, since automatic did not work, you click custom, and then your add button becomes active. So click add, and then it gives you the two. So this is your primary data source, this is your secondary data source. So click user ID in one, pattern ID in the other. So now you have linked the two, and click OK, and that will be your linking field. Okay. So now we have that here. Click OK. So now it puts a little link there. So the link tells us if the link is broken, that means the potential is there for a link, but the link has not happened yet. Okay, like you can break the link. Let's see whether. Okay, so now the link is broken, so it's not linked, but it's possible to link because you see that clip icon. So check that, and you have that. So now if you bring in amount, all right, so this is what we saw before, right? So we had 1, 1 and 2. Okay, so there is 1 has been combined. Okay, okay, let's. That's because the 1 is repeated twice. So if you bring in number of records, you'll see that. So 1 has 2 records, and 2 has 1 record, and there is 4. Okay, so this is a user ID. I don't know why they don't have a record here. Okay, let's see. Okay, so that's that. All right, so there is a way of looking at the. Okay, let's look at here. Sheet 2, user ID. Okay, let's. There is a place where we can look at the entire data set. I don't know where it is. Okay, let's do it again. User ID, right? And then here, let's bring in pattern ID. All right, so pattern ID is null. That's what you see here. Pattern ID is null. Okay, so and amount is 1 400. So 1 is 400, 2 is 200, and 4 is blank. So nothing there. Okay.